¿Dónde está la playa? You okay?
Did you just let one off?
No. What do I actually smell? I actually
Is that
can't
me?
smell. I can't smell anything. You ever smelt it, Delta?
This feels a bit like the Gagosian Gallery.
No, it does feel like White Cube, Saatchi Gallery,
Yeah. Purgatory.
Blue Chippos. So do you want to introduce today, or should I introduce today for Art Club?
We know that I always introduce.
Go for it.
Welcome back to Art Club. Today we're going to be talking about...
Edgar Degas.
You had to really get that water down.
Edgar Degas.
Edgar Degas.
An impressionist mogul, but I shouldn't actually say impressionist because he didn't assign himself to the impressionist movement.
What did he assign himself to?
Well, he was part of the impressionist movement, but he was a different painter. He painted slightly different than the impressionists of his time. Shall I kick it off?
Kick it off.
So Edgar Degas.
Frenchman?
He's French, but also half American. So his mother was an opera singer, an amateur opera singer.
Lovely.
She was born in New Orleans. I never know how to... Is it New Orleans? You
can
always
say
go with the accent, don't you?
Say
New
Nola.
Orleans. Anyway, New Orleans. And he was half American. So he was born in, I think it's 1830s.
1830?
Yes, he was born in 1830. I think it was 1834. He grew up in France and kind of rejected the period of Impressionists, which were to go en plein air, to paint outside.
What?
En plein air. Have you heard of the phrase en plein air? You would do it if you're going outside with your easel and canvas and you're painting...
En plein air?
En plein air, in the air, out in public. So the Impressionists would paint impressions of artworks of... Well, the artworks would be an impression of something that they would see. So let's just say...
A tree.
A tree. And they would paint their impression of it, whereas Degas was more of a realist with it, and he wanted to paint the subject as it was. He was quite good at history paintings and painting history paintings, which at the time, within the 1800s, mid-1800s, the Salon, which was the big gallery in Paris. The Salon really pioneered historic paintings and that kind of traditional aesthetic, but he kind of rejected that. And he looked at it and thought, well, look, I want to paint, like a lot of modernist artists of the time, something different. They wanted to paint what was in front of them. He did actually get accepted at the Salon for his history paintings, but I don't think he went through with exhibiting them there anyway. So
well known at the time?
Yeah, relatively well known, friends with Monet. Yeah, so his contemporary, which is pretty cool, and who also had done a similar thing with painting and painting the subject of matter of life. But let's go through history, because I think that's an important thing. The Franco-Prussian War hit in the 70s. I think it was in the 1870s.
My memory serves
if your memory serves you well. And he served in the Franco-Prussian War, so he was part of the national...
Franco.
Obviously France. And I think Prussian was Germany, no?
Yes.
Yeah, so it was Napoleon III at the time, and he served within the war. It didn't last very long. I think it lasted just under a year. The Germans were successful in conquering whatever, but he moved to New Orleans to get away from the aftermath in Paris. So
smart.
Yeah, really smart. And I think he was in his 30s at the time that he served in the war, maybe slightly older, and he noticed he was starting to lose his eyesight. So this preludes to something later on, which I'll talk about. That's
terrible for a painter.
Yeah, it was also terrible for someone who's serving in the war as well, because you don't want to go out into war and have bad eyesight. It's probably one of the main things you want to have. Awful. But his father died when he was 40. He had to fork out selling his collection of artwork at the time to pay for the debts that his
dad
brother had got the family into. I don't actually know what the brother had done, but he debted the family, which meant that Degas lost a lot of his own personal collection.
And he was going blind.
And he lost his father. It's a bit of a poor period for Degas. So it's pretty unfortunate. So he moved back to his motherland, which was New Orleans, to escape the post-war aftermath. In the 70s, this is when he moved back, he painted... Within this period, a painting called A Cotton Office in New Orleans. Get it up. So whilst you get this up, I'm going to explain a bit about it.
I've forgotten the name already.
A Cotton Office in New Orleans, Degas. So slavery was a massive thing within pre-60s in America, but the civil rights movement was in 1864. That means the cotton farm, which Degas' family had actually started a business within.
Oh, they were slave owners.
They were slave owners essentially, but they lost a lot of business whilst this happened, because slavery was abolished. So in the South especially, where they made their money from this, they...
Can't say I feel sorry for the Degas.
No, not really, but it actually shows within this painting that he's starting to paint real life subject matter that's in front of him. And yes, he's not in Paris, but he's back in New Orleans. So here, actually, his brother and his father are within this photo. I think that's the brother and the father's in the foreground.
Is this the father sort of sleeping?
Yes,
peeling a
withering
banana
away.
In a top
But
hat? Is that a banana?
no, I don't think that is a banana.
Oh, he's
I think it's a
reading a tiny
handkerchief. It's a
little
little
book.
tiny little book or a handkerchief.
And here's the pile of cotton.
And there's the pile of cotton. So it kind of preludes that something's happening within America, and obviously for them it shows that there's no slaves present and they're working on their own right. Do you know what I mean?
Probably wasn't true.
Which probably wasn't true.
I mean,
but post the abolishment of slavery, it was. They had to make a business somehow, and it clearly faltered. Unless they had secret slaves.
I don't think that's
still working for them. But let's think.
Who's this shadowy figure?
But let's think optimistically. It's just a gentleman of the period of time. But this is just a really good example of showing how Degas' painterly technique is very real. He's painting a realist subject, a bit of sfumato. So in the Renaissance period,
Sfumato. It's the crumbling of the paint.
Crumbling of the paint, and it's that smoky look. So Caravaggio.
I love
use sfumato and chiaroscuro. So chiaroscuro is the cutting. Yep. You know what it is, don't you?
Of the light and the dark, the shade.
Yeah, exactly. And then sfumato is kind of the softer.
Yeah.
Exactly. So here he likes to use soft painterly techniques, and he's painting in situ, in spaces, whereas en plein air, which was common of the Impressionist era, would be painting outside in spaces. So after this period of time, he moved back to Paris. And like I said, the school of thought was very much the traditional painting, and I was actually reading, and I don't know if this is necessarily true, but apparently Monet and Degas started an anonymous society of artists who were going to reject the period of time and their traditions and represent more of a realist art.
Wow.
And
like a cult.
Almost like a cult, but not as weird as a cult
The
is
Illuminati.
traditionally thought of to be. And in parallel to this, in Russia, now I'm going to just silo into something that I know a lot about. There was the Preoccupation.
The
Preoccupation, which is completely off-piste and nothing to do with Degas, but they were also rejecting the academy and going against the grain to paint real subjects of poverty, social nature. Leo Tolstoy was around at this time. It was all kind of intermingled. So there's a lot of artists globally within this period that are starting to look at the traditional aspects of art and starting to reject it.
That's a pretty bold move as well at the time.
It's a pretty bold move, and like I think we said in an art club before, contemporaries and movements all about rejecting the period of time or doing something completely different.
And with the establishment
and with the establishment, which would have been the salon. It was the salon. It was pretty revolutionary. But moving on slightly. So in his 50s, 40s, later on in life, Degas did lose his eyesight completely.
He's a blind man painting.
He is a blind man, but just before he lost his eyesight, so in the, I think, 78, he painted a picture called The Star. Please get The Star up.
It's such a shame that laser eye surgery wasn't a thing.
It is a shame. I think it's around 78, but it's in the 70s. It could be slightly earlier. So he painted a picture called The Star. Now, this is my personal favourite painting of Degas. Ballerinas, and still today, are quite a big piece. Well, how would you say? Ballerinas are
it's a strong motif.
It's a strong motif. It's a strong motif of his artwork, but later on in his life, it's a strong motif in his artwork. So, as I said, he paints a lot of real subjects, real time, and ballerinas in the 1800s had a prolific name for themselves. They were almost like celebrities, and they were well thought of, but there was also a dark side to the patrons that would look after them.
I think I know where this is going.
Yeah, so first of all, it's in the background.
I've spotted it already.
So first of all, the beauty of this is that in the foreground there's this stunning ballerina.
Lovely dress.
There's a realism. The painting technique is gorgeous, and she's like a swan-like beauty. But in the background of the painting, you can see a dark figure, kind of surrounded by this chaotic painting. The paint around
tornado of colour almost,
and it contrasts the foreground to the background. And throughout the 1800s, it was pretty well known that patrons, you can look at it as managers of ballerinas,
they were nonces.
They would be very controlling over the ballerina themselves, and would be quite seedy and dark.
Yes, they were nonces.
And here he's trying to paint something which you can clearly see is a beautiful painting, but there's this troubled background and there's a darkness to it. So
it's the light and the dark, right?
Yeah, and I think it's one of the best paintings that he's painted, and it's one of the most historic in terms of understanding what's going on in society at the time. Like I was saying, so moving on to ballerinas, another thing that Degas did, which was kind of really modern within its time, was sculpture. So
did he?
As he got older and as he started to lose his eyesight,
he could still feel things.
turn to the more malleable subject of sculpting. Of sculpting. And he sculpted a ballerina in, I think, 1881, and it's called The Little Dancer, aged 14.
What was his preoccupation with dancers and ballerinas? Did he just see the beauty?
I think he just saw the beauty of it. Obviously, his mother was in theatre. She was an opera singer, and he was probably brought up within that period of time of respecting it. And going to the theatre of that time was a very social thing to do, and he was representing the culture of the time. It was very popular. This received so much backlash in the press. Yeah, because it's not a typical bronze. The original artwork itself used a real tutu and a real
that looks like the real one.
Yeah, a real tutu and a real bodice piece, so corset. Wow. And this was totally abnormal for the time, and they thought, what is going on here? He's going completely West, not representing something that's a traditional subject. It's a modern subject with a real tutu, kind of contrasting something that's art historical with something that's very present. And as sculpture turned to be one of his primary mediums later on in life, this is the best and first kind of example of him sketching or creating the ballerina.
I mean, it's really weird.
It's quite, when you look at it, you think, oh, like it's an obscure piece of artwork, but
so here it is, with the garments taken off.
Yeah. So as he became pretty well known for it, there were editions created,
and it's called The Little Dancer of 14 years.
Yeah.
So 14 is the prime age to be a dancer.
Well, and I mean, that's even the scarier things. And actually, one thing that you can contrast it to, not as dark as it is football, nowadays.
Sorry?
Well, you might think of
the little footballer of 14 years.
Well, when people and scouts are looking for football stars, they really look at a young age of 14 onwards.
Even younger?
Well, even younger. I don't know much about it.
I got scouted when I was about... oh, wait, it's yet to happen.
Well, it's yet to happen. Good one. But that's the thing. Like, even the football industry today, like a lot of young guys and maybe girls are scouted from a young age. Yeah. That's why parental consent has to be taken into consideration. Very different to the ballerinas of the 1800s. Yep. But you have to think, like, these kids are very young and they're vulnerable, and Degas was representing that in a really painterly technique, which I think's really, really beautiful. And yet the Impressionist era was throughout that period of time. But he kind of stands out. He really stood out for me, Degas, and that's why I think it's a great artist to talk about.
I mean, I didn't realize how many ballerinas he painted. Yeah. It's like non-stop. Mm-hmm. I think he had an obsession.
Yeah, well, I mean, it could have been his muse.
We'll see you next week for another topic, movement.
See you later, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.
That was really interesting.